Daniel was finally heading home after a long business trip. Exhausting meetings and sleepless nights had made his eyelids heavy. As he exited the highway and took the shortcut suggested by his GPS, he noticed that the road was shrouded in thick fog. He could barely see ahead. The trees appeared momentarily in his headlights before vanishing into the mist. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, he let out a deep sigh when he realized his phone had no signal. As he drove on, he spotted an old model car on the side of the road. Its windows were fogged up, but he could clearly see the silhouette of someone sitting behind the wheel. The man's head was slightly tilted, and his eyes were locked onto Daniel. When their eyes met, a chilling sensation crawled through Daniel's spine. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the moonlight, but the man never moved. Trying to shake off the uneasy feeling, Daniel pressed the gas pedal. But a few minutes later, he glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. The same old car was now following him. Its dim headlights flickered eerily through the fog. At first, he thought it was just a coincidence, but the car was matching his speed. Daniel's unease turned into full-blown panic. He sped up, but no matter how fast he went, the headlights remained in his mirror. His heart pounded. His palms were slick with sweat. Coming this way had been a mistake. He grabbed his phone, but there was still no signal. He took the first turn he saw and checked his mirror. The headlights were gone. He exhaled deeply. Maybe it had just been another traveler on the same route, and he had panicked for no reason. But the road ahead grew darker and eerily silent. Just as he started to relax, he heard a deep breath inside the car. His entire body turned ice cold. Someone was there. Slowly, he turned his head and saw a figure sitting in the passenger seat. Its eyes were pitch black, staring into nothingness. Daniel's throat tightened. He couldn't breathe. In sheer terror, he yanked the steering wheel. The tires screeched as the car swerved violently. It hit a ditch and his head slammed against the wheel. For a moment, everything went silent. The world blurred. When he opened his eyes, the engine was still running, but the figure was gone. He didn't dare look at the passenger seat. His breathing was ragged, but he could still feel the weight pressing down on his chest. He wasn't alone. A faint, warm breath brushed against the back of his neck. Despite his fear, Daniel started the car and sped home. His hands were still shaking when he pulled into his driveway. He shut off the engine and took out his phone. A new message was waiting on the screen. His breath hitched as he read it. There was no number, no sender, just a single sentence. "You forgot to take me with you." Daniel's body stiffened. Slowly, he lifted his head toward the rear window, where a faint handprint had just appeared on the glass. Mia was driving home after a long night shift at the hospital. Her tired eyes struggled to focus on the road as the rain pounded against the windshield. The highway lights flickered in the distance, and the only sound inside the car was the soft melody playing from the radio. Wanting to get home as soon as possible, she left the main road and turned onto an old shortcut. The road was narrow and deserted. Trees swayed in the wind, casting eerie shadows in the darkness. The rain grew heavier. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the side of the road, raising a hand. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She normally wouldn't stop, but the man's pitiful appearance made her hesitate. He was drenched, tall, and thin. His head was lowered, standing motionless. She slowed the car and slightly rolled down the window. "Do you need help?" she asked. The man slowly lifted his head, his face pale. He gave a silent nod and got into the back seat. Mia noticed the water dripping from the man's clothes. The seat fabric quickly darkened as it absorbed the moisture. "Where do you need to go?" she asked, but the man didn't respond. She glanced at him through the rearview mirror, but he was sitting still, his hands clasped on his knees. He hadn't moved a single inch since getting in. Mia tried to suppress the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. Minutes passed, yet the man remained silent. When Mia glanced into the mirror again, a chill ran down her spine. His face looked blurred, as if out of focus. She blinked and looked again, but it had returned to normal. "I'm just tired, that's all," she whispered to herself. The rain's pounding and the suffocating silence inside the car made Mia's unease grow. She reached for the heater, turning it up, but the cabin still felt unbearably cold. Something was wrong. She looked at the rearview mirror again, and this time, her breath hitched. The man's face was gone. A dark, featureless silhouette sat in the seat. Her heart pounded wildly. She gripped the steering wheel, struggling to find a rational explanation, but terror had already paralyzed her. She yanked the wheel to the right and slammed on the brakes. Tires screeched against the wet pavement as the car came to an abrupt stop. With trembling hands, she turned around. The back seat was empty, but the fabric was still soaked as if someone was still sitting there. Gasping for breath, Mia stumbled out of the car, rain drenching her instantly. She scanned the darkness, but the road was empty. A heavy, suffocating fear wrapped around her chest. She rushed back into the car, her hands shaking as she started the engine. She didn't stop until she reached home. Once inside, she slammed the door shut and leaned against it, trying to steady her breathing. She could still hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Was any of it real? Or had exhaustion and fear played tricks on her mind? She took a few deep breaths, trying to shake off the lingering dread. The next morning, still feeling unsettled, Mia got into her car. Before turning the key, she glanced at the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. She let out a deep sigh, but the uneasy sensation hadn't left her. Just as she was about to shift into reverse, something caught her eye. A faint handprint was pressed against the fogged-up rear window. She reached out and wiped at the glass, but the handprint vanished upon her touch. Her pulse quickened. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A message appeared on the screen. No number. Just a single sentence. "Thank you, but my journey isn't over yet." Ethan was returning home after a long business trip. He decided to take a shortcut through the old town roads, but the path was eerier and more desolate than he had expected. The sky was overcast, and not even the moonlight was visible. As exhaustion weighed down his eyelids, he noticed an old, seemingly abandoned gas station by the roadside. A faint unease stirred in his chest, but he decided to stop for fuel and take a short break. Ethan pulled up next to the pumps, but the digital displays were dead. A light flickered inside the station, and he noticed a shadow moving behind the window. When he stepped inside, an elderly man stood motionless behind the counter. His eyes were fixed on Ethan, empty, devoid of emotion. As Ethan prepared to speak, the man parted his lips and whispered in a warning tone, "You shouldn't stop here." Before Ethan could respond, his phone vibrated in his pocket. When he glanced at the screen, his breath caught. A single-word message had appeared. "Turn back." Even stranger, the sender's number was his own. His hands trembled as he shoved the phone back into his pocket, rushed outside, and got into his car. He slammed on the gas and sped away from the gas station, but the further he drove, the thicker the fog became. Minutes passed, yet the road never changed. Finally, the same gas station reappeared in front of him. His heart pounded as he gripped the steering wheel tighter and turned onto another road. But soon enough, he ended up at the exact same spot. Panic set in as he took deep, shaky breaths. He had to be making a mistake. He pulled out his phone to check the map, but the screen was nothing but static. For a split second, he caught his reflection on the screen. But the eyes staring back at him weren't his own. They were dark, hollow, and lifeless. Gasping for air, Ethan made a desperate decision. He stopped the car and stepped out. The fog had thickened, and the gas station sign flickered ominously. Behind him, a whisper echoed through the air. The voices grew clearer. "You belong here now." Ethan rushed back to his car and turned the key, but no matter how hard he pressed the gas pedal, the car wouldn't move. His breath hitched as he glanced at the rearview mirror. Someone was sitting in the back seat. A faint, shadowy figure remained completely still, yet Ethan could feel it breathing. Trembling, he looked again, and the figure was gone. The next morning, the townspeople found an abandoned car in front of the gas station. The engine was still warm, the headlights still on, but Ethan was nowhere to be found. The town's elders whispered that this wasn't the first time it had happened. They claimed the road was cursed, that those who entered never made it out. And some swore that on certain nights they could see the shadow of someone resembling Ethan standing inside the gas station, watching.